All right, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the Palos Verdes Democrats November meeting. My name is Tim Dixon, and I'm the Democratic president, or the president of Palos Verdes Democrats. And so I want to call the meeting to order and note that we have an outstanding attendance both in person today, as well as a large number of people attending by Zoom. A little bit worried while having coffee this morning that with the rain we had, especially yesterday, that it might deter attendance. But thank you for coming out, because we have a great turnout and we're going to have a great speaker. And we're going to go a little bit away from our agenda today because our speaker is coming to us from Chicago. And so we're going to put some of our business a little later in the meeting. So let's go straight to our keynote speaker. And I want to thank our second vice president, Louis Vandenberg, for booking this speaker, as well as working with our guest speaker on this presentation, which I think is going to be one of our best presentations that we've had this year. Our guest speaker is Dr. Robert Pape. He is one of the world's most respected and widely cited political scientists in the world. He is a professor of political science and the director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats at the University of Chicago. He has become one of the most important voices analyzing political violence, nationalism, and the future of democracy in America. His recent New York Times op-ed, quote, "We may be on the brink of an extremely violent era in American politics," electrified readers nationwide and was featured across major media outlets. He's a frequent commentator on CNN, PBS, ABC, and Face the Nation. For some reason, I don't think he's ever invited to appear on Fox News. He is a graduate summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Pittsburgh and the Harry S. Truman Scholar. He earned his PhD from the University of Chicago, and it is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Robert Pape.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And it is a great pleasure to be able to speak with all of you. So as you're hearing, I've studied political violence, national security affairs for 30 years. I've also advised every White House since 9/11. That includes many visits to the West Wing in Joe Biden's White House. But I have never spoken to Palos Verdes before, much less the Palos Verdes Democrats before. So you are at the heart of so much of what matters to our country. It is a true honor to be able to speak with you. So what I'm going to talk to you about is political violence and foreign policy with the new Trump administration. And the bottom line that I want to leave you with is that Trump is sending America down dark paths, both a dark path at home and a dark path abroad. And these dark paths may well come together in 2026 in ways that would be very detrimental for our country and our democracy. There are things we can do about this, but it's very important to understand that right now we think about these as separate spheres. I'm going to try to explain them each separately in some of the intersections, and 2026 may become really, truly a high point that we really need to already take seriously right now. Now, to focus on political violence here at home, you've already heard that in June, I put out this major warning that we were on the brink of a major era of political violence. And with the Kirk assassination and the surge of ICE operations in Chicago, and now starting just today in Charlotte, we are clearly past on the verge of the brink. We are in the grip of what I call violent populism. That's the name I give to the era we live in now, violent populism, that is worse than nasty politics, but not civil war. And for years, we've been in this predicament, and I've created a name for it because we need to have a name to understand what we are living through. Now, what is violent populism and how is it characterized today? Violent populism is characterized today by two key features. First, historically high political assassination and assassination attempts against both political parties. If we go back to 2022, in the spring of 2022, there was an assassination plot against conservative Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And then just a few months later, in October, there was an effort to assassinate a Speaker of the House. Of course, she was Democratic, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. She was not home, but the assailant almost killed her husband. 2024, we have two assassination attempts against then Republican candidate for president Donald Trump. And then in 2025, we have the arson assassination attempt against Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, the assassination, not just an attempt, the assassination of key Democratic leader in Minnesota, and then also, of course, the Kirk assassination. And I'm leaving out many other points here that I could go on to show that we haven't seen a surge of assassinations and political assassination attempts like this since the 1960s. That's what I mean by a historic high, and it's happening against both leaders on both sides of the aisle. But the second key defining feature of violent populism is that there is high support for political violence on both the right and the left. Now, for many years, for now 5 years, my center at the University of Chicago, it's the Chicago Project on Security and Threats, we've been conducting quarterly surveys, that is, every 3 or 4 months, a new national survey. It's a representative survey of support for political violence in the United States. We've now done 16 of these. We are the people that do this. There's nobody who's done this as much as we have in the country. So we know quite a bit about the trends in support for political violence. And the reason that support for political violence matters is because why would a volatile individual who's got their own psychosocial problems, what would nudge them over the edge to commit an act of political violence like those I just described? It's their perception that there's support in the body politic for that act. You see, when there are high levels of support for political violence, that's what nudges volatile people over the edge to actually act out violently. And what that nudge is that extra idea that they will have community approval, that their act will actually be approved by some significant segment in the body politic. So that's why these two elements go hand in hand. So what is the support for political violence in the United States today? And we saw this first in May, but then we see it again in September, just a month ago when we did our most recent survey. And that's why I rang the alarm bell. But I'll just start with the September 2025 numbers. This is after the Kirk assassination. 28% of Republicans agree, or strongly agree, that Donald Trump should use the U.S. military, that is the most violent force on the planet, the U.S. military, to suppress Democratic protesters. And 27% of Democrats agree that the use of force is justified to remove Donald Trump from office. Now, those numbers, again, almost 30% of each party supporting the use of force, and pretty extreme use of force, I should say at that, that represents 60 million American adults in the United States. This is on both sides of the aisle. And if we just would go back to the previous September, because remember, we've been doing these quarterly surveys, we can look at September 2024, right after the second assassination attempt against Donald Trump. The numbers were half that. Half that. So literally, we have doubled the support for political violence in the United States in the last 12 months. It is really not an exaggeration to say that we are a powder keg, and we have to understand We are now firmly in the grip of what I call violent populism. And this isn't just one-sided. This is on both sides of the political spectrum. Now, the key flashpoint going forward is going to be deportations. We see this in our surveys. I'm not going to take you through slideshows, but I could. Deportations is clearly the key flashpoint. And of course, I'm talking to LA, so you know quite a bit about this, I am sure. And I'm talking to you from Chicago, and I know quite a bit about what's happening in Chicago. And what you were seeing in LA, then Chicago, and now just beginning in Charlotte are highly intrusive deportation operations. Again, I won't belabor it, but these are raids on schools, community vendors. Here in Chicago on September 30th, we had Black Hawk helicopters attacking essentially a key apartment building. And we also know now that the data is coming in that only a tiny fractions that so far that we can verify have of these people being deported have criminal records. So we just got the first tranche here in Chicago of the 607 of the 3,000 that ICE has detained since Operation Midway Blitz. And of that 607, only 16 have a prior criminal record. This is also true from Human Rights Watch, what we know is happening in LA. Now, what's happening though is certainly in Chicago, and I know this in great detail because we're tracking it day by day by day, is that you are seeing increasing spirals of violence. ICE is becoming increasingly aggressive against protesters. Protesters are becoming increasingly aggressive against ICE, and these tactics are spiraling. Just literally 10 days ago, there was a group of 14 moms who camped out, sat in the middle of a road, and then they were kind of picked up and in this very aggressive way, and then made videos about how they felt being so treated and so humiliated and how much they felt their personal safety was at risk. Well, just 2 days after that, we had our first shooting against ICE. So what's happening is that you may only see bits and pieces of the different clashes between protesters and ICE. But what we're really witnessing right in front of our noses are spirals of violence, and there's reason to think this is going to go forward. You see, we've also conducted now 2 representative surveys of Chicago. So we're not guessing about what the city of Chicago's 2.2 million adults think about ICE and think about the coming of the guard, etc. And the bottom line is, our last survey was done about 3 weeks after Operation Midway Blitz started, so right at the end of September. And what we essentially found is that Chicago feels terrorized, literally terrorized by what's happening. 61% of Chicago adults do not want ICE and do not want the National Guard deployed to Chicago. Only 21% of the residents, the adults in Chicago, support that. There's another 20% that are kind of ambivalent, but that's 3-1 against. This is not a margin of error issue. This is overwhelming. Another key finding in our survey is that 54% of the adults in Chicago think that the goal of Trump is to replace the Democratic leaders of the state and the city and get them out of office. Only 25% think, and that is in the city of Chicago, only 25% think the goal is to reduce crime, deal with illegal immigration. The overwhelming majority of our city believes that there are ulterior political motives at work. And keep in mind, this was at the end of September of this year. We have another year to go before we have our midterms. So this is a really worrisome situation. It is crucial. It is crucial for leaders across the aisle, and that includes Democratic leaders, to take down the temperature here. And because this kind of fear can easily morph into anger, can easily morph into support for political violence, which can then lead to political violence. And I want to emphasize, and I'll be emphasizing this several times, that the more political violence there is in the country, the more this is going to work to Trump's advantage. And it's going to work that in his advantage in multiple different ways. You see, many people are talking about how the Trump administration is centralizing power and how this can lead to the end of democracy. And I don't mean to minimize the end of danger to democracy. I just want to underscore that the main way democracy could be in danger in our country is through the rise of political violence. I don't think I have to emphasize to this crowd, the Democrats just had three major victories here, just not even 2 weeks ago. Here. So all the discussion here about the sort of nonviolent ways that our democracy can come to an end, I don't want to say there's nothing to that, but we really need to see that the main danger to our democracy is going to come through political violence. And another point I want to make is, and those of you, some of you may be old enough to remember the 1960s, the last time we had violent populism in the United States, is that in the late 60s, that part of America, that time period was violent. And that violence is what ushered in the Republican president Richard Nixon on a law and order. And then it got him reelected again in 1972. So it's really important to understand that the more political violence that occurs in the country, the more this is going to push people to the right. And it almost always does. And it's not just unique in our country. And that's a very important thing to see, and why it's important to keep a lid and try to take down the temperature on support for political violence. Now, I want to say, I won't talk as long on Trump foreign policy, but I do want to say a few things about it because it dovetails with what I'm saying about our country. The bottom line is that since Trump has come in to office, he has not ended quagmires. He's actually either made them worse or added to them here. Now, I don't want to say Trump's done absolutely nothing of any good, but let's just focus here on Gaza for a second. So it was absolutely a great thing to get those 20 hostages out. But it is not the case that, as Trump promised, he has ended the conflict in Gaza. And in fact, since November 1st, Israel has killed 242, at least 242 Palestinians. That is, this war is continuing, and it is going to be the case that this could even get ramped up even more in the future. And so this is not over. This is again a continuing quagmire. The second point I would make is Trump promised to end Ukraine and the war between Ukraine and Russia. This is not ending. In fact, it looks like both sides now are really in for the long war of attrition. This war has already gone on over 3.5 years. It may go on another several years. Trump has not done anything to bring that to an end. Also, since the Trump has come in, he's added a conflict with Iran. So yes, he brags that he destroyed Iran's nuclear program. What he did is he attacked a building. The problem is the number 408. So if you don't remember anything else I say about Iran, please remember the number 408. That's the amount of kilograms that Iran has of 60% enriched uranium. That is what we don't know happened after the bombing. There is no evidence whatsoever that any of that 408 has been destroyed. This is one of the big things happening right now inside of the Israeli government for why they want to go back and start bombing more targets. That number 408 is the crucial issue, not simply destroying a building here, even if the building's underground. The issue is we really don't know what happened to that 408, and over time, simply not knowing is likely to drive us to do more and more and more things that'll produce, I think, another quagmire. And as I speak, we're moving the Gerald Ford, the biggest aircraft carrier in the world, our aircraft carrier, off the coast of Venezuela. This may yet be another quagmire. Folks, I've studied leadership decapitation. I spent several years teaching for the U.S. Air Force. I've wrote a whole book on air power, every air campaign since World War I. I know a ton about this. And the bottom line is killing leaders is the easy part. The hard part is, as we found out when we did regime change in Iraq in 2003, you can topple the regime, you can even announce mission accomplished, and you're in for a real quagmire going forward here. So we really have a series of quagmires. Tariffs, these are proving to be a disaster, essentially. They are pushing Asian governments to bond more and more with China. I just spent 2 weeks in China in June surveying their advanced industries. I know a ton about this with Alibaba, with BYD, glad to talk about it. But what those tariffs are doing is not stopping China at all. They are pushing people to work with China more and more to help China become number one. This is not hurting China, and it's alienating publics in Canada and Europe. So, and by the way, we may just soon discover this is all unconstitutional, even by the conservative court, the Supreme Court. Now, how does this matter to what I was just saying, though, about our domestic issues? All of this quagmire, these issues in Trump foreign policy is creating deep fissures in MAGA. Now, you might say, oh, it's great. He's against Marjorie Taylor Greene, and it's great. He's having battles with Tucker Carlson. What this is going to do, folks, is it's going to create great pressure for deportations, more deportations as the key tool to hold MAGA together. So I think people keep wanting Trump and MAGA to self-destruct. This is a bad hope because it may happen, but you don't hope for it and you certainly don't bet on it. And more likely, this is going to lead to a ramping up of deportations, not a calming down. Now, how does this relate to the election? It is crucial, as I said, that we think about all of this I've just said in the context of the 2026 midterms. And the Atlantic Monthly, many of you probably subscribe, many of you probably got your issue just as I did, has a cover story right on point. In the cover story, they lay out a plausible scenario where in the midterms, if the elections are close in certain states, Trump would have both the capability and certainly he's had the demonstrated will with January 6th to use force to invalidate portions of the vote in his advantage. But what is the key? The key is democratic violent protests. That's the trigger to the Insurrection Act, to martial law, to the actual invalidation of those votes. And that's the key in that scenario. So political violence here is not going to work to the advantage of our country. It's not going to work to the Democrats' advantage, and it's not going to work to the advantage of our country. Now, what do you do about this, though? What do you do about this scenario? It's really twofold things. Number one is you win large. You win not by just he's going to get X percent, you get 1% more. That's called minimum winning coalition. That's not very good. What you do is you get a large margin, and what that means is you got to go for the blue collar voters that the Democrats have basically been abandoning for the last 30 years. That means economics over identity politics. And I say that not with a dog in the fight here. I say that as somebody who wants to have this work out here. And it's just crucial. And why is that? Because if you go after the white collar, you're essentially going after people with BAs. And there's only 38% of the country, adults, who have a BA. So right off the bat, you're just making the whole problem much worse here by only focusing messages and tailoring policies for people that have a BA. So I think it's absolutely crucial to go for the blue collar vote, if for no other reason than that's 60% of all adults. Um, the other thing I would say is it's crucial to have a messaging campaign to lay out on social media in particular that extremism doesn't work. And it doesn't work in the favor or interests of moderates and the blue collar. And that's important because as we go forward, as I said, the one way that we could really lose our democracy, and I think the way that we could have a real problem, a true constitutional crisis with the 2026 midterms, is through political violence. And that's why I'm so focused on that issue. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. All right, let's start with any questions from people here in the room. Go ahead in the back. Yeah. Just wait for a second.
We're going to bring you the microphone. Who is speaking? Okay, I'm coming back there. I'll hold the microphone for you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'd like to take issue with you on a couple of points. One is with regard to political violence being an equal problem on the right and the left. I think on the left is more reactive to the violence that they've been receiving. And on the right is because of fascism and bigotry and what Trump has been saying and doing with regard to January 6th. Number two, with regard to the Democrats abandoning the blue collar, I don't see that. I did not support Biden in the primary, but I have to admit his administration has done, it's been one of the most on domestic policy, one of the most progressive in decades, getting all kinds of stuff done for middle class and the underclass. So I don't know what you're talking about with regard to the Democratic Party abandoning the blue collar. Of course, more could have been done. I'm not denying that, but I just don't get it.
Dr. Pape.
Oh, so let me say a couple things. So first of all, I'm not trying to draw any moral equivalences here. So I'm an academic, I'm a professor, I'm looking at this, I'm just calling balls and strikes. And I definitely get that when there's violence against our own community, that is our community, we are not going to, sort of make it very easy to see that the other side could have an equal problem. I'm not even trying to go there, sir. I'm just trying to point out this is happening on both sides. And if it escalates here, whatever seems to be the good reason to support the violence here because the other side started it, it's not going to work out very well for the Democrats. And that's really the history in our country. It just doesn't work out very well. The second thing to say is that all you have to do is look at the exit polls here in the November exit polls, and you can pick the CNN polls. You could actually pick the Fox exit polls. They both say the same thing. And you would see that Trump really cleaned house on the blue collar, and Kamala Harris cleaned house on people with BAs. Now, that's not 100%, of course. And of course, Kamala Harris, got 48.3% of the popular vote, and she couldn't have gotten 43% without getting people who were not simply BAs, because there's just not enough BAs to get that number. So I definitely know. But the bottom line is all the way through, whichever the polls are, you can look at our data, you can look at what's called Blue Rose, that's the DNC's actual official polling agency. You can listen to Ezra Klein's analysis. You will see this is all over the numbers here. Final point I make is that one of the things I do is I do field research. So I went to 4 Trump rallies. I went to 4 Harris rallies. I spent all day standing in line, 8 hours with these folks. I talked to them and I listened to them. You go to the Trump rally, say the one in Western PA, Butler. That's the one where he got shot, and I went to the second Butler rally. And what you will hear over and over and over again are stories about 50-year-olds voting for Trump who 25 years ago were Democrats, and they moved. And that is just story after story after story. So I'm not trying to tell you that I'm just trying to just point out the just core basics here, that it's just really hard to win when the messaging is really focusing on, sort of not really reaching out. And again, I think you win by going for 55% victory, 55-45, not 48-47.
Okay. And as I'm hearing you, I know we have participated as a Democratic club in a lot of different rallies and protests. And one of the main things that we have emphasized is peaceful protest. And at times we have engaged when we're peacefully protesting people that are very angry and ugly, and they pull up along the street and say hateful things. And again, I think to a person, we have refused to engage in that. It's almost like playing basketball and you got to put your hands in your pocket to avoid a foul. But as I hear you, that Trump's strategy is probably to invalidate, if it's close enough, parts of the electorate. And we've got to put him in a position where the only people committing violence are people on his side.
That's exactly right.
saying?
So I spend time, Midas Touch, I've talked to many national protest organizers, those in Chicago. We just had a big No Kings. I spent time with them here. I'm really impressed with how well the protest organizers are operating. There's no doubt they've got the memo. But my point here is that what's happening nonetheless on the ground is U-Hauls being backed in and smashed into ICE agents. I'm not saying that's being supported by the DNC at all, but that is actually happening. I'm saying we actually now have shots with now the perpetrator's been arrested here against the ICE agents. So this message here needs to just be a continuous message, and it probably needs to be done by people with higher profiles in the media than simply the protest organizers here. And that hasn't happened enough.
Okay, good point. We have another couple of questions over here.
Where am I going? Here, I'll hold the microphone for you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to agree with you completely that I think that we need to focus on things like affordability. I think that's what the elections recently showed us. Also agree with you on the problem of violence and how any violence on the left is only going to be used as a way of excusing more violence and tamp down on the right. The question I have kind of feeds off that, where it makes me wonder during an age where we're dealing with a pernicious influence of money and its influence on the mainstream media, and with the pernicious influence of social media, and the ability for a lie to make it around the world before the truth can get its pants on, as the saying goes. How do we counter everything that's going on the right and the disinformation and all the kind of forces arrayed against us, so that our message of affordability, of the need for nonviolence, for all the other advantages that the left holds here, how do we get that message out effectively?
So let me make 2 points. One is, and then I'll come right to the social media point as my second point. But one of the things that was very, very clear to me going to the rallies, the Harris rallies, the Trump rallies, is the Trump campaign had a ground campaign. And this, of course, was turning point action. They went door to door. They were really pushing. You see what I mean? Harris campaign, for all the bill, whatever the number is, I don't know, but there's no ground campaign. And that was really evident once you went to the rallies, because at the rallies is where they're signing up people on the Trump side to do the ground campaign, if you see what I mean. But that just wasn't happening on the other side. And then talking to the Blue Rose people and some of the national people at the DNC, I just don't think there really was. So one of the big things to point out here is that it's really important to take this energy, this anger even, and revector it toward more productive politics. And I think that's something that can really happen and can be really useful, but it's got to be, I think that can make a big difference. The second thing I would point out, and this is something we're developing here at our center, is that, so it's really difficult for the Democrats, as Democrats, to do anything but partisan messaging. And so what we're doing is we're trying to do something very unique here at the University of Chicago, which is we're trying to conduct, and we haven't kicked it off yet, but conduct a social media campaign for moderation. And that's a really important thing, as I'm explaining to you. It's also really important that it be done via some sort of a neutral, or at least much more perceived as more neutral body than the DNC officially. And so that's what I would say. We need to really be thinking about not just, again, reaching out to how do we get men in 25 years old. We have to think, I think, a little more broadly, ground campaign and new forms of social media campaigns.
All right, excellent. We have a couple more questions from in the room, and then I think we have one online as well. So let's do a couple more in the room, and then we'll go online.
I'll hold this for you.
Don't hold it real close or overmodulated.
Very good. Thank you for the precision.
Thank you. Two questions. One simple. Did you wear a red hat when you were attending the Trump rallies?
No, I didn't.
The second one, more complicated, is, when you look back at Project 2025 and you look at the things that the Republicans have done, they've really played the long game. And one of the things in the long game is they've always supported arms, all private people owning arms. And so consequently, this keg that is happening in Ukraine, in Venezuela, in all of these different places that is going on, whether it's Israel or whatever, is now arming and causing and supporting the argument that you're making. And so consequently, I'm thinking that this support of individual arms, these little pistols that are going to go against the, M16s or whatever they have, is kind of a known thing. And since Trump and the Republican Party is in power, that is one of the tenets, I think, that is supporting this. So I think your argument, I'm really following your argument, but I find that that's true. And the way that we're not supporting Ukraine and some of these others like that, it's like we're causing more problems, spreading more fire with more sparks going everywhere that are unresolved.
Sir, there's so much to that. So I'm one of the world's leaders in studying international terrorism, multiple books on suicide terrorism in particular, studied over 8,000 individuals who carried out suicide attacks. This is one of the big things I do when I'm talking to other governments around the world. So there's so much to this, but the key thing I want to point out is, why did terrorism really start to take off after World War II? There was tiny bits, but almost nothing of what we call terrorism before World War II. It's because World War II spread all those little guns you're talking about all around so many different parts of the world. And that, plus radios, is what really led to this rise of what we describe as terrorism, and why it's so difficult to get a handle on. And you're right, as we spread more of that, that is itself going to feed this beast. And so that's part of the reason we hit so easily into quagmires.
We have another question from a Palos Verdes Democrat member.
Thank you. I've been marching since 1968.
Yeah. So I've been studying you then.
And I'm deeply concerned about the infiltration of malevolent actors into peaceful protests, who will come in and look like they're part of the protest, but then start smashing things and provoking violence, so that it then looks like the peaceful protest was violent. We saw some of that during the George Floyd related protests. What are your comments about that, please?
Yes, this is one of the, so first of all, there's multiple ways in which the violence happens in violent protests and so forth. And obviously, if I'm on, television or something, we only got 30 seconds. We're painting with such a broad brush. But your question really gets at one of the most insidious ways that it happens, and one of the most difficult and challenging things for the protest organizers, because as we know, the protest organizers are going to great lengths to kind of keep the legitimate protesters peaceful. One of the points I would point out, though, is we see this in our surveys, is that people don't like to basically rat on people or say I saw such and such with something in advance. And that's what I would say is just simply, now, how do you get at this? I will still maintain that the more our leaders with national name recognition will carry this water about taking down the temperature and no violence and so forth, the more this too will be diminished. Will it be 100% diminished, ma'am? I don't think we could ever get 100%. But that said, the problems in this Atlantic article, if you haven't read it, and look, I'm not trying to push the Atlantic, okay, but it's if you just read the opening page here, you will see a very, very plausible scenario, and you will see how the protests and the violent protests could easily feed into it. And this is really the thing we know we can do much more to take off the table.
All right, thank you. We have members joining us online, and I think Wally has his hand up. You want to ask a question?
Yeah, hi, thank you. And boy, I really appreciate this presentation. It's terrifying. And I'm so glad to know these facts. I want to pick up on what the previous speaker said. She's talking about a false flag operation.
Yeah.
And we've seen it all through history. It happens all the time. It happened in Chicago when the Democratic Convention was in Chicago, where the police were false flag. But let's take it a step further and deduce out of this that Trump is actually interested in martial law, and that he's a rationalist. He appears crazy and stupid, which he is, I think, a lot. But he's also moving his whole policy apparatus towards complement to the false flag is when you starve people and you deny them health care. What do you expect? There is nowhere to go when you have no future. And I suspect what he's very cleverly doing is creating the conditions by which there will be an insurrection, and that he will then have that excuse that you're alluding to, which is a militarized response to all of it, and then install.
Sir, that's exactly what I'm concerned about. I was not anywhere near as nationally prominent on this issue on October 5th, 2020. But on October 5th, 2020, that was when Trump in the debate said about the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. Well, I was brought on television to talk about that. And there's no reason, it's still on tape, so you can find me in the Chicago Tonight, it's called, talking about this. And I was really warning that we had to worry about this all the way through the January 6th certification of the vote. And the announcer who was talking to me about this audibly gasped, "What do you mean? I thought this was only a problem on the election. You're talking about the certification of the vote. Nobody's talking about that, Professor Pape." Well, I'm sorry, but I study Bosnia. I study Slobodan Milosevic. I don't just study American politics. I'm studying political violence all around the world, even in democracies here. And so the playbook that Trump is unfolding here, this is really not unique to Trump. Now, I think it's unique to people who only study politics. It's unique to journalists because that's what they do. They don't study Bosnia. Why would they? Or why would they study Serbia? You see, but sir, this is why I'm concerned about this. Am I absolutely sure that's the only way this can? No, but it is one we can readily identify, and it's one that we can do a lot to take off the table, and it is the most dangerous. And so that's why I would say we should call attention to it.
Well, I think we've got you mentioned messaging, and I've been engaging lately with some people on social media on the other side, and Trump has convinced them now that Nancy Pelosi was responsible for 1/6 because she didn't call in people to react, even though we know he was watching TV, enjoying the whole riot. And they believe too that he's convinced them that the people rioting were actually Antifa and Democrats dressed up like it was Halloween as Trumpers. And for some reason, it's not logical, because why would we riot when our guy won. But it's in terms of messaging, these people believe that we were rioting in Trump gear, trying to overturn our own election, and he's convinced people of that. And then he pardoned them, which again, why would he pardon 1,600 Democrats that dressed up as Trumpers and rioted? But what can we do about messaging when it's just complete illogic, in my opinion?
So let me go back and talk about January 6th. So I studied with big research teams at the University of Chicago, all 1,575 people who've been prosecuted for January 6th. We probably know, if you come to our CPOST website, we've got more big fat reports on this than probably anybody else. Even the FBI was using our stuff, and so was the Senate and the January 6th committee. One of the things I want to tell you is that there was a myth that was circulating, which is the public's bored about January 6th. You can't make a dent in it. And the problem here is that if you actually study, and again, we're doing these quarterly surveys. So if you go back to the summer of 2022, when the January 6th committee was having its very long sessions here, we can see how that is depressing and moving moderate Republicans against Trump and January 6th. We can see it in the survey data. And so this idea, I even debated the editorial board of the New York Times about this, because they were running this alternative that nobody's paying attention. They're just not looking at the data in this way. The moderate Republicans were the ones who were moving. And then what happened during the Harris campaign is Morning Joe just ran the same snippets over and over again, but this on MSNBC. Of course, you're not going to move anybody on MSNBC. You've got to create events. And I'll just throw one out there. He probably won't do it, but invite me and Tucker Carlson to come to LA to have a real drag out debate about what really happened on January 6th. Let's actually we need mega events, not simply another like Morning Joe. Okay. Because again, you're talking to the chorus here. You've got to go where you're actually going to move the needle.
Exactly.
Hi, Bob. It's Lewis.
I hope you're okay.
I'm okay. I've produced a number of media interviews with you over the years, and one of the great things is always being able. What? Oh, I guess you could actually see me. How do I do this? Oh, whatever. Come on, I can't figure it out. But one of the. Okay, I'm being directed. One of the great things is having these discussions, the pre-interviews with you. And for this event, we had a great discussion. And you said something. Yeah, you said something that was so important. I want to make sure that they hear it as well. But there in Chicago, you are at ground zero of a major incursion by the United States military, which you described like an occupation after.
That's right.
And you spoke about the application of military tactics and procedures in a pretty book standard way, forward operating bases and so on and so forth.
That's exactly what's happening.
The Trump administration is playing for keeps. They're playing for real. This is not a show. This is a real military operation. Could you speak about that?
That's right. So keep in mind, so Lewis knows this, but I have for decades studied counterinsurgency operations, Iraq, Afghanistan, 14-volume set for the Obama administration's Pentagon and so forth. So I know quite a bit about this whole topic area. And there's a standard, I'm going to call it concept of operations. That's the military term of art for what the Trump administration is doing. And again, this will be unfamiliar to most of the people who are the political reporters. But that concept of operation is you have a main operating base, That's Great Lakes. Then you establish forward operating bases, and that's what's happening in Little Village and Pilsen, where they're buying buildings. And why they're buying buildings is because those forward operating bases is where they're doing the super granular, detailed intelligence on an ongoing 24/7 basis. From there is where they're sending out the raids and so forth. So they're building this whole infrastructure here in the city of Chicago. With the big, beautiful bill, they've now put in all the money to now be able to populate that with more people over the next year. So that they're building a standard, what's called search and destroy operation. And what that does, and this is one of the big lessons of Baghdad that we had to learn, took us 3 years, is that it causes the local population to feel under occupation. We didn't call the invasion of Iraq an occupation, but the local population did. And what that does is it creates the seeds of terrifying the people, but also it plants the seeds, I'm sorry to say, of actual terrorist groups. That's where the terrorist groups came from. ISIS did not exist before we invaded Iraq. We created that Frankenstein monster here. And there's just many, many stories like that. So this is really, we're only at the beginning of this. This goes on for 6 months a year. This has the effect on the 2026 midterms. Oh my goodness gracious. The dark path we're heading down, folks. It's just we don't want to go down these paths.
All right. I think we have time for one or two more questions. If there's any other questions from the floor. Right over here. Okay.
I think we have two here, or just, okay, we're gonna do you. I'll hold the microphone.
So I love that you're talking about this, but in Palos Verdes, I feel like we're it should be realistic about the fact that we could also be a target because and believe me, I totally support pacifism and Martin Luther King style, protests. But I think nothing speaks guillotine more powerfully than building a ballroom while you're taking food away from the poor people. And we live in a community where I would say it's a good time to increase the security in your house. And I've read, I think just yesterday, NPR had an article saying 7% more Democrats are purchasing weapons. And I have a great many friends who are Jewish who are actually registering Republican if they're over 60 to protect themselves from being searched out and harassed. So I think, although everything you're saying is 100% true, I think the other side of that information is that be cautious because people are going to get very angry when they can't feed their families. And we're being put in a very difficult situation where moderation is not really a lesson we need to give out. We need to give out real factual information about what you just said he's doing, which is manipulating the media and misinforming young men. The other thing I wanted to say is I've seen several articles recently that military people who are sent to these places are questioning the mission. And I think if you look at what happens in this situation where you get this tremendous violence against their own community, people will stand up ultimately. And if you look at McCarthyism, it just ended because people came to their senses. And I think rather than be too fear-mongering, although I do believe you should increase your security in your house, we should be optimistic that the better angels will prevail in this, as they have repeatedly, I think.
So I just want to talk about a couple things, and this is a little deeper than I said before. So you remember, ma'am, very, very important comments you just made. I talked about a new style social media campaign. So this would be for the first time partnering with a Canadian film producer in order to go to say guard members and so forth, and film what we call moments that matter, to have them talk about their feelings, just as you are saying. So for too long, long, social media campaigns have just been another way to get PR for PACs, for PR for the candidates. And that's what you see a lot when you turn on the television in the evenings. You're just seeing another version of the candidates speaking. Well, this just really only, again, preaches to the choirs already. And I really believe that there can be alternative approaches, and we've got to do more to do. But we also then need to keep in mind that what I'm also saying is we need to reach out to wider swaths of people here. And I think that this is that rechanneling I'm talking about. There's a lot of fear and angst among over a third of the Democratic Party. I think if some of even a quarter of that could be rechanneled here into much more productive organization for get out the vote campaigns for 2026, I think this would make an enormous difference. Now, I don't do that. We do the first thing. I don't do the actual ground campaign work, but this is what I think you saw with Mamdani. I think this is what you did not see with Harris, and this is what you saw with Trump in 2024. This is, I think, something's got to be put on the table. If that's not happening, why is that not happening?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your presentation today. One of our members said it was scary and horrifying.
Sorry.
We needed to hear it, and I think we all enjoyed hearing some of your suggestions on how we combat that, and we'd love to see the Tucker Carlson doctor debate.
Any day you set it up, I'm there.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Doctor, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you. A big honor. Big honor. Thank you very much. Okay.
That was great.